Right, so Donald Trump has discovered cocaine. Not in his bloodstream, but as the perfect excuse for war. 11 Venezuelans blown out of the water? Narcos. 9 fishermen held at gunpoint on their own tuna boat? Narcos. F-35 stealth fighters landing in Puerto Rico? Naturally, it's all about smugglers and speedboats. And now Colombia as well. Washington's pet project for 30 years suddenly branded a failure in the drug war the very month his president dared to call Israel's Gaza campaign a genocide. If you can believe this is all about cocaine, I've got a bridge to sell you. What's really being smuggled here is an old trick in a new bottle, dressed up as aggression as interdiction, punish leaders who refuse obedience, and mask the real prizes: oil, minerals, and blind loyalty to capitalism. Right, so there is something grotesque about Donald Trump casting himself as the warrior against cocaine. In his telling, US destroyers roam the Caribbean to protect American families. Stealth F-35 fighters roar into Puerto Rico to scare off the smugglers. And tariffs are imposed to choke off narco cash flows. But reality looks nothing like the script, does it? And given the day-glow skin tone of the tangerine tyrant passing himself off as the president of the USA, the chemically induced complexion doesn't exactly scream free of additional additives, does it? But the seriousness of the story is no laughing matter. On the 2nd of September, US missiles ripped into a vessel in the South Caribbean, killing 11 people. A week later, 3 more were dead after another strike. In between, 9 Venezuelan fishermen hauling tuna were boarded at gunpoint by a destroyer, held for 8 hours, and released without charge. These are not clean police operations. These are acts of war dressed in the language of law and order. You see, you do not need stealth jets to chase drug runners, do you? Seems rather obvious. You do not need guided missile destroyers to stop a fishing boat either. And you do not slap 25% tariffs on countries that dare to buy Venezuelan oil if you're worried about cocaine. You certainly do not decertify Colombia, Washington's most faithful partner in counter-narcotics for 30 years, despite the reputation Colombia very much has, especially in the very year its president dares to cut ties with Israel. The narcotics narrative is the fig leaf. The real game is oil, minerals, and obedience. Venezuela, with the largest proven reserves of crude on the planet, has always been the prize. Colombia is rich in coal, gold, copper, lithium, and other minerals. That's the test case for punishing leaders who won't fall into line, especially when those leaders call Israel's war on Gaza a genocide, when it is, heaven forfend. But put together, this story is not of drug interdiction, but of saber-rattling and intimidation and the recycling of one of Washington's oldest tricks. Shout Narcos, fire the missiles, and hope no one notices as they pop oil rigs up in the background. So on that 1st September strike, Trump was almost gleeful, wasn't he? He boasted that 11 narco-terrorists had been killed, many linked to Venezuela's notorious Tren de Aragua gang. The White House produced footage and intelligence it claims showed narcotics on board. But no independent verification has ever been offered. Venezuela's account was starkly different: an unprovoked attack in international waters, civilians among the dead, and sovereignty trampled underfoot. The words may differ, but the reality is the same. 11 people killed without trial, their families told only that the President of the United States had arbitrarily declared their family members criminals. No evidence, no due process, just bodies in the water and a label applied after the fact. The second strike a week later followed the same pattern. Trump again declared victory against traffickers. Caracas again spoke of aggression, and again the dead could not defend themselves against the label pinned to them by a foreign power. Then came the fishing boat, a tuna vessel, 9 men aboard, intercepted by a US destroyer. Great use of public funds there, Donny. They were boarded, searched, detained for 8 hours, and then released. No cocaine, no contraband found. Nothing. For the men themselves, it was piracy. For their families, it was terror. For Caracas, it was proof that the United States no longer respected even the thin veneer of their sovereignty. And yet Washington just shrugged it off, insisting this was all part of a counter-narcotics movement. By then, of course, stealth fighters were already arriving in Puerto Rico, though, weren't they? 10 F-35s, the crown jewel of US air power, parked on the runway at Munich's air base. The Pentagon swore this was all part of the mission against the cartels, though. F-35s deployed to find drugs? Really? Bombers? Come down in the last shower, did we? No one with a straight face can claim stealth jets are needed to chase smugglers and speedboats. They are there to send a message to Caracas. We can strike you at will. We're in the right place to do so now. And to the rest of the region, the skies are ours. Maduro's response obviously was furious, though. He doesn't take these things lying down. He's not the sort. He called the US actions aggression, vowed that Venezuela would resist, and even warned of armed struggle if Washington pressed further. In a fiery broadcast, he branded Senator Marco Rubio the Lord of Death. accusing him of cheerleading bloodshed. Entertaining Netanyahu as he is right now by calling Palestinians barbaric animals as the UN formally finds Israel guilty of genocide, I'd say Maduro is right on the money about Rubio there. Venezuela boosted coastal troop deployments and mobilizes civilian militias. Caracas sees these strikes not as isolated counter-narcotics operations, but as preludes to regime change, yet another attempt at it. And given the history, well, why wouldn't they? John Bolton once admitted on live television that US oil companies would benefit if Venezuela's crude were opened up. Trump has been blunter still, imposing tariffs on any country that buys Venezuelan oil. The prize has never been cocaine, it's always been about the oil. And let's not bring Juan Guaido back into this conversation. But the real shock today came not in Venezuela, but next door. This morning, news has dropped that the United States has done something it's not done in nearly 3 decades. It's decertified Colombia as a partner in the war on drugs. For 30 years, since the height of Plan Colombia, Bogotá has been the favourite ally. Billions of dollars in US aid, training, equipment and joint operations made Colombia's military one of the most US integrated in the hemisphere. Every year, no matter how high coca cultivation grows, Washington certified that Colombia was cooperating with them. Suddenly that seal of approval has just been stripped away. Washington pointed to UN data, though the data is from 2023. Coca cultivation, it said, had reached 253,000 hectares in 2023, up from 230,000 the year before. Potential cocaine production had risen to 2,644 metric tons. Potential being the operative word. To US officials, this was proof, though, that Colombia had failed demonstrably. But Gustavo Petro, Colombia's president, was not having a bar of that. He pointed to record seizures, which are much more recent. Thousands of labs being dismantled, and of course the lives of dozens of soldiers and police that have been lost in counter-narcotics operations. His line was very simple. Colombia was not failing, it was sacrificing. To declare otherwise was to spit on the graves of those who had died, frankly. Petro, in fact, went even further than that. He called the decertification an insult. He argued it was political and not technical. Critics in Bogotá and beyond agreed with that too. For years, Colombia had received certification despite the high coca levels because its leaders played ball. What had changed was not the coca leaf, but Petro's politics. He had pulled Colombia's ambassador from Tel Aviv. He'd suspended arms deals with Israel. He'd accused Tel Aviv of genocide in Gaza. He'd stopped transporting coal to Israel. He'd begun talking about keeping Colombia's mineral wealth sovereign, about turning away from fossil fuels completely, about drawing even closer to BRICS. And they co-chaired a meeting of the Hague Group recently to bring about sanctions on Israel. The timing told its own story, therefore, really, didn't it? Very few believe it's a coincidence that Colombia's first decertification in 30 years off the back of a single set of 2-year-old figures, albeit the most current ones available, came within months of Petro's break with Israel. The US will never say this openly, of course. It insists it's about hectares and tonnage. But the coincidence is too sharp. The inference is far too strong. Colombia's punishment looks less like drug policy and more like political discipline, Trump style. The association with Venezuela is striking as well. In one country, missiles and destroyers. In the other, decertification and humiliation. Both are neighbouring countries, of course. Both resource-rich. Both led by governments unwilling to obey Washington's line. Left-wing socialists leading both nations. Both punished under the same narco label at that. It's not policy consistency, it's strategy. The pattern is old as the hills. The United States has used narcotics as a pretext in Latin America for decades. Noriega was once Washington's man in Panama until he wasn't, at which point his ties to cocaine suddenly became the justification for invasion. The Contras in Nicaragua were funded by covert drug profits while the US looked the other way. Plan Colombia funneled billions into a militarized approach that left cultivation high, but US contractors paid. The Chavez years saw constant accusations of narco state even as US demand for cocaine-fueled cartels across the continent. The constant is not success against drugs at all, but leverage over governments. And this time the pattern is wider. Venezuela and Colombia are being targeted together now, creating a regional arc of coercion. F-35s in Puerto Rico, tariffs on oil buyers, destroyers in the Caribbean, decertification in Bogotá. This is a full-spectrum display. It's not about smugglers, it's about demonstrating who controls the northern Andes and the Caribbean basin. And beyond the region, others are watching. Russia has ties to Caracas. China buys its oil. Iran has supplied fuel and drones. By pressing so hard, Trump risks not only destabilising neighbours, but inviting rival powers to step deeper into the hemisphere. The gamble is that the domestic optics outweigh the risks. Trump believes calling fishermen traffickers and labelling allies failures makes him look tough. Always got to look tough, doesn't he? Even as he stands there bright orange. He believes Americans will see strength, though. But the costs are already being counted. Oil markets are sensitive. Every barrel of Venezuelan crude kept off the table tightens supply. Prices rise. Petrol prices, or gasoline, if you will, creeps up. And Americans vote with their wallets at the pump. Tariffs, too, are blunt. A 25% surcharge punishes not just Venezuela, but any country that buys its oil. The result is higher costs across the board. Tariffs are not free. They are taxes on those buying the goods, passed on to consumers. Inflation inevitably follows. We've seen this cycle over and over again, and still, Trump just doesn't seem to get it. Shipping insurers have noticed too. When US destroyers start boarding fishing boats and missile strike vessels, well, insurance premiums rise. Importers and exporters end up paying even more again. Wall Street watches Colombia nervously. A country once hailed as a stable ally of the US now looks politically risky to them. Descertification sends a message to investors. Politics rules, not stability. Capital flees to safer ground. But the boomerang effect that follows is real. What Trump sells as strength abroad could implode into weakness at home. If gas prices spike before the midterms, if inflation bites again, if Wall Street jitters, the very drug war theatre stage for domestic gain could become the disaster that sinks him at the polling booth. But he's always just too stupid to see it. He still doesn't understand how these things work. He's just too hard of thinking. And then there's the law. Striking boats in international waters without producing verifiable evidence of narcotics is not just heavy-handed, it's bloody illegal. Even allies are uneasy about it. What happens if the next drug boat turns out to be indisputably civilian? The diplomatic explosion would be enormous. Venezuela already calls the tuna boat raid piracy, which it was. It's directly comparable in effect to what Israel did in boarding Freedom Flotilla coalition vessels in recent months in the Mediterranean, again in international waters. The moral stakes can't be ignored either. Colombia has lost thousands in its drug war. Soldiers ambushed, police assassinated, villagers caught in crossfire. Families grieve every single year. Yet when their president refuses to nod along with genocide in Gaza, none of that counts in Washington's calculus anymore. Venezuela has suffered years of sanctions, shortages and pressure. Yet when its fishermen are seized at sea, they're labelled traffickers without proof. Sovereignty, sacrifice, human life, all subordinated to politics. This is the real meaning of Trump's war on drugs. It's not a war on narcotics, it's a war on governments, unwilling to obey him. It's a war for oil and minerals, and it is a war for Israel's diplomatic shield. For Trump, the pretext is enough. For Latin America, the question is whether this time the neighbours see through the fig leaf, close ranks, and refuse to be hammered into submission. Perhaps a new BRICS plan proposed by Iran might be a saving grace here, though. The war on illegal sanctions has become the topic of just such a debate amongst the BRICS economic bloc, and a proposal by Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian might see the orange drain from Trump's puckered face. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.